Hello and welcome to Hendo-One, an online art gallery originating from Flat Rock, North Carolina. My name is David Day, and for this show I'm going to be both the docent and the represented artist. The current exhibition is a curated collection of my recent project titled STONEWORKS. I'd like everybody to note, please mute your microphone until you have a question, unmute, then talk, then remute. This will keep us from hearing background noises because there are a lot of people here visiting this evening, and that will make it a more pleasant experience for everybody. So come on inside and let me show you around. Before we get started with today's tour, I'd like to take a moment to tell you about Hendo-One. Hendo-One is a gallery that exists to showcase emerging and established artists and to support dissemination of their work worldwide. Unlike brick-and-mortar galleries, Hendo-One charges 0% commission, with all of the sales going directly to the artist. This allows the artist to bring their work directly to you without going through a commission broker. As you take part in today's tour, please ask questions of the artists and deal directly with them on purchases using the contact information provided on subsequent screens. For today's tour, I am going to be the featured artist. I am an intentional camera movement or ICM artist from Flat Rock, North Carolina, and I am widely recognized for the application of ICM techniques that produce studio-generated abstract art. My work has been featured both locally and nationally, with a number of recognition awards for my work that transforms many common household items into unique abstract art. My contact information is listed below if you'd care to get in touch with me. Before we proceed into the gallery, I'd like to tell you a little bit about what got me into photographing with ICM techniques, stones, and rocks that I've found around my house. Rocks and stones are ubiquitous in nature. They're everywhere. They make up most of our physical world. Some are aesthetically pleasing, but most of the rocks we see every day appear quite mundane. Stones that we see in walls, foundations, fireplaces, driveways, and gardens really hide their beauty from us. But through ICM, I can bring out their inner beauty of these everyday rocks and stones to reveal the elegance of the work I title Stoneworks. Well, here we are in the foyer, and I have two of my works here that are titled Exposed and Exposed in Reverse. They're actually the same image, and I'd like to tell you just a little bit about each one of them. Let's take a closer look. Exposed is a composite of two different images that were made using ICM techniques. Quite frankly, this photograph makes me feel a little bit uncomfortable because it looks like I'm observing a woman in the bathroom through a shower curtain without her knowledge of me being there. The composite is two ICM images. The first is an ICM of stones coming out of the fireplace, and this has been inverted and then placed on top of a plastic bag intentional camera movement photograph, and then blended using Photoshop. What works well for me on this one is the background is reversed, and it's made translucent as a consequence of that reversal, and thus it becomes the foreground that reveals a very, very private moment behind it. Exposed in reverse is the exact same image as exposed, but it is a lot less revealing, and this suggests a very dark and hidden meaning. This was achieved by just basically making a negative of the previous image. It's a little bit questionable now as to what's going on behind that curtain, and I'm not exactly sure. The ambiguity of it does make me feel a little bit uncomfortable. Here in the first ICM gallery of Stoneworks, we have 5 images that I have curated from about 150 images that were ICMs of stones and rocks. This gallery shows the depth of color and emotion that can be achieved with ICM on everyday subjects. Let's take a closer look at each one of these images. This image is called Redite. There's an interesting story behind the naming of this photograph. Years ago, I was skiing with my children out in Utah, and we were going from Salt Lake City out to one of the ski resorts, and we were passing all these mountains that were just nothing but masses of red rocks. Well, we knew what some of the other rock names were, but we had no idea what this one was, so we just started calling it redite. Redite is a composition ICM of LED backlit plastic bags and two stones that I found out in my garden. It's a bit disturbing with the addition of all the red, and I will show a similar one later without the red to show you what I mean. This one makes me feel quite a bit on edge. Remnants is an image that is made from multiple stones in a fireplace outside of my house. Straight away, when I took this photograph and saw it, it became one of my favorite single image ICMs. Simply because if you look at it for a while, there's a lot of detail in there that's not readily apparent. In the background, we can see at least two faces that consume a large part of this image. One of the faces is to the center right and has dark pursed lips. And the second one is a face in the center of the image with a very unusual and mischievous grin. Then we have two people standing in silhouette on a ledge in front of these faces. And this really evokes a lot of sadness because we get a sense from the streaking that's going on that one of the people is crying, and they are crying black tears that are streaming down across this ledge face. So that is remnants. Pasture at dawn just feels to me like a day that is just about to get started. Very, very early in the morning. This is an ICM of two rocks in partial sunlight out in my garden. I'm not sure if it's an ominous sign of a bad day about to happen or new beginnings and opportunities in a new day. The ambiguity is what makes it mysterious and suspenseful. And it's really interesting. If you look very closely about it, up above that very dark area, you can just make out some trees in a forest that's in the upper left-hand corner of the image. And these give way to the pasture that's down in the front of the scene. Next, we have approaching singularity. This is an ICM of multiple rocks and mortar in a fireplace, and this was taken by moving the camera from very close to the mortar and then out and away from the stones as the shot was made. I call this approaching singularity because it reminds me of a Star Trek scene where the Enterprise is just hitting warp 1. And this is what you would see on that series when they would approach warp 1. The juxtaposition of the white against the dark promises getting through a tough time to something better. And that's what I see in this photograph, and that's how it makes me feel. Tequila Sunrise #2 was a fun image to make. It is a composite ICM of LED backlit plastic bags and two stones that were shot and then inverted to negative after a sweeping motion. If this image makes any sense to you, you probably drink too much. Or maybe you should drink a little more until it doesn't make sense. It's a really interesting process to make this type of an image. And this was the very first image I made that was a composite between stones and plastic bags. And it still is available as a one-on-one current opportunity for ownership. And if you want to find out a little bit more about what that is explained on my website. So if you're interested in becoming the sole owner of this image, this is one to buy because it was my very first one of this type of an image. We're about halfway through the tour now, and that brings us to the back of the building in my office, and there's a really interesting image that I wanted to show you in here. I call this image dental, and I really would like to place it in a dentist's office somewhere. Doesn't this image just scream Novocaine, please? Let's take a closer look at it. Dental is an ICM of multiple rocks and a garden wall at midday. The light areas are where we had rocks that were mixed with some sort of quartz material I'm not exactly sure what it was, but the sunlight was shining from the right-hand side, not quite directly on, so we get that light and dark area in it that makes it look just like a couple of teeth that are white and a couple of teeth that are very stained by, I don't know, food or nicotine maybe. It's just a dentist's nightmare as far as I'm concerned, but I love this image for what it represents. So let's go on over here to gallery number 2 now and take a look at these images. You'll see they're a little bit more subdued than the first 5 images that I showed you. And part of that is because these are all single images and there's no compositing involved here in these ICMs. They are all ICMs of various stones and rocks around my house. Let's take a closer look at the first image that I call Cold But Close. Cold But Close is an ICM of 2 rocks in a wall at dusk, and the sunlight was just barely touching that white area of the rock to the left, and that's what created that very, very light area there, and the somewhat pink area just to the right of that. Remember the red image in the first gallery? This is that same image without the red plastic bag overlay. It looks serene and sad to me at the same time. I really love it for the feel that it has. And that brings us to sunrise at the canyon rim. This was taken between 2 rocks in the garden in midday sun. The second rock was in bright sunlight and contained a few granules of dirt, and that's what made for the nice woods effect on the left-hand side behind someone standing at the canyon edge looking at the sunrise. The texture of the rocks brought out the midday reflections and really made this image pop. I'm really looking forward to printing this image on metal, and that option is available on my website for all of my photographs. This one makes me feel like the beginning of a promising new day, as long as I don't fall down into the abyss. That guy in there is standing really quite close to the edge. Rocks with Frozen Water is an ICM of rocks and mortar in a fireplace chimney in the early morning. The water, or what we think of as water or ice in this photograph, is actually the mortar between the rocks. What happened here was I took the camera and dragged the sensor in the direction that was opposite the flow or the layment of the rocks. And the light areas, which were the mortar, created this sense of falling water or ice. And it's reminiscent of mountain cutaways along highways in the winter, where underground springs exit the rocks or exit between the rocks and freeze to create very unusual effects as you're traveling down the highway. And now we come to Rising Moon. Rising Moon is a single exposure ICM of rocks in a chimney taken in the early morning. The only thing that I think of that could make this image any better was if there was a silhouette of a wolf standing in front of the moon and howling. The rotation of the camera hit that rock in the upper half of this image just right to give the details of the mountains and the craters that are in the moon while blurring the foreground with that same rotation. This is an image that I call Hard Work. It is another ICM of rocks and mortar in a chimney outside of my house. I don't know if you can see it or not, but to me this looks like some person who is wearing a glove, has very muscular arms, and is lifting some very, very heavy objects that are stacked on top of one another. It reminds me of very difficult labor for sure. Note the glove in the hands, the craculature in the gloves, and the scar on the arm muscle gives this one a strong, bold, I can do anything feeling. Now we're going to move over to the third and final gallery for today's Stoneworks exhibit. I made a number of monochrome images in making this project or putting this project together, And I really had a tough time choosing a couple of representative shots here because I like monochrome so much. So let's walk in and take a closer look at each one of these. This image is called Rock Study Number 1. Again, it is an ICM of rocks and mortar in a chimney. And what I did with this image was similar to what I did with the previous image, Approaching Singularity. I made a rapid movement away from the scene as I was taking this image. There were lots of clashing colors in this image, and I originally didn't like it. But once I got rid of the colors and turned it to black and white, I really, really enjoyed it. It gives a really head-on sense of falling into an abyss and rapidly approaching the bottom of the pit. There's a lot of energy in this photograph. Fractured Nation is another image of rocks and mortar in a chimney that in this case I made a negative out of that image and then antiqued it afterwards. Fractured Nation has a Native American feel to it with background faces and a teepee in it, and the mortar created a fractured bone effect. This image certainly evokes sadness and loss. Now we are at rock study number 2. This is the same subject matter that I've been dealing with a lot in this gallery here today. It's an ICM of rocks and mortar in a chimney. In this image, though, it's different from the previous one that I showed in that the white is not due to mortar in this one, but it's because the light was catching the edge of one of the bigger rocks that were protruding out from the chimney right next to a recess in the chimney. And as a consequence of that, and shooting it very early in the morning, I was able to get this very, very nice tonal effect that occurs in this image. Last but not least, we have an image I call Two Stoned Friends. Again, it's an ICM of rocks and mortar in a chimney, and it was created by doing a quick movement left to create the image. It's the strong push processing that I used in this image resulted in a limited tonal range, which added to by the grittiness of the stones created a very, very strong feel to the overall image. But somehow I find this image one that is relaxing and friendly. It could also be two people who are staring out of a window just watching it rain. I really like this one. Well, that brings us back here to the foyer, and that concludes the show for today. I'd like to thank everybody for visiting. I really hope you had a good time, and I really hope you have a new appreciation for the hidden beauty of everyday stones. If you'd like more information on the works that you've viewed today, don't hesitate to call or contact me with the contact information provided throughout the show. Please be careful going out the door and going home. Oh, by the way, I'd like to mention to the late arrivals who missed the beginning of the show that the show will repeat here in just a few minutes. So hang tight and we'll let you in the front door here in very short order. Thanks again, everybody.